I want to thank you all for your continued prayers and cards and inquiries about my health. I am getting better all the time. It takes a while, but the prognosis is generally positive. And for that, I give God thanks and praise. When you're going through major healing, as you know, you have to go, as you know, April, you have to go to the doctor a few times. And I have recurring visits, and they're scheduled at the same time, so you see the same people in the office. And I generally, when I go in, I like to sit down and go over in my mind what I want to talk about with the doctor, just so that I make sure that I don't leave without having something being said. There's another guy in the office who comes at the same time I do. His name is Manuel. And Manuel is loquacious. And he wants to make sure that I know what he wants to tell the doctor. And so when we first met, I was trying to keep my eyes on the floor, but he was not having any of that. And he said, "You need to talk. What's your name?" And I said, "My name is Bill." He said, "Well, my name is Manuel, but you can call me Manny. That's what everybody calls me, Manny. And don't you forget it, okay?" I said, "Okay." He said, "Thanks, Bob." As you can imagine, I felt right home. The nations of Israel and Judah were broken beyond repair, it seemed. They had split over politics and money. The prophet Jeremiah had told them that because of their blatant disobedience, they would have to endure God's wrath by being carried off to be Babylonian slaves for 70 years. And most of them went. But a disbelieving few tried to stay in the homeland and eke out a survival, tough it out. Those who were slaves in Babylon actually seemed to fare better. The Babylonians granted the Hebrews freedom to do their business, to intermarry, and while those Hebrews who stayed behind languished in the mess and the squalor of the marauders who crept through the homeland looking for even more to pillage and steal, there was a sense of spiritual dislocation and upheaval for both groups. They were ashamed before God, and they had been beaten by a foreign power. And it seemed that the Babylonian god Marduk-Nebu had prevailed over Jehovah. How could that be? They must have wondered, does God have the strength and the power to protect us and care for us? You and I wonder, will God be with us to protect us and care for us if enemy planes powered by advanced technology fly overhead and attack us? The book of Isaiah is actually written by at least 3 different prophets, but they are all known to theologians as 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Isaiah. First Isaiah prophesied before the Israelites left for Babylon. 3rd Isaiah's voice was heard when the Israelites returned to rebuild their civilization, at the center of their civilization, which was the temple. But 2nd Isaiah, the prophet from whom we hear today, came on the scene when the Israelites were the most undone, when they were at their most vulnerable, living outside of their homeland, held in slavery. And in their despair, 2nd Isaiah predicted that what hope always does in despair, what Annette read in our hearing today, Annette, thank you, by the way, for stepping in for an ailing Heva and doing such a lovely job.
Yes, you did.
Isaiah predicted that a Savior, one of justice, would come. He will not march into the square and raise his voice until he has overpowered all the others. He will not hurt a bruised reed or someone who is barely holding on to existence, trying to survive in the midst of such great danger and animosity. And he will not extinguish a faintly burning candle, someone who is trying to do the godly thing, trying to example the right path, but is almost overcome by darkness. Isaiah says that in spite of God's chosen people who are hurting and languishing, this Savior, this one sent by God, will bring forth justice. Second, Isaiah realistically points out that this form of nonviolent leadership is the absolute toughest. Yet Isaiah promises that in spite of jeers and catcalls, this servant called by God to bring justice will not grow faint or weary until that Savior has established justice on all of the earth. No blitzkriegs, no shock and awe, but God's Savior will choose patience, never ceasing to work for justice until the Savior is heard and trusted by people, until the justice work takes root and good, inclusive ideas become the order of the day. What is justice? What is justice? Well, there are at least two kinds. If some individual or culture cries out, "I am hurting, I am disregarded, I am marginalized," more and more as a nation with laws, procedural justice, or the unbiased understanding and application of legal factors in courts and human relations comes into play. I was humbled and grateful when the United States, after long debate and after years of oppression, used procedural justice to legalize marriage for all consenting adults. As a nation, we understood the marriage laws to be biased, favoring some over others. But there is another form of justice known as distributive justice. Distributive justice. What is distributive justice? Distributive justice is not reactive. It is proactive. Distributive justice is the equitable distribution and utilization of resources and responsibilities in and out of legal context. Food, water, health, land, safety, week of compassion, the Burbank Coordinating Council, the Burbank Temporary Aid Center, the Little Whitechapel Food Pantry, the nickels and the dimes and the dollars that you hand out on the street from day to day, all for everyone. Constantly sharing the abundance of life. Constantly sharing the abundance of life. And while distributive justice is not the predominant way of the earth, thanks to the reconciling work of God, distributive justice has been established on earth through Jesus Christ, and it is growing. So, who is this servant of which 2nd Isaiah speaks? Who is this Savior bringing justice? Some theologians have theorized that Isaiah had a particular person in mind from his own time. Cyrus, the Persian king, who defeated the Babylonians and rather than keeping the Israelites in perpetual slavery, allowed them to return home to rebuild their temple and reconnect with Jehovah. The author of the Gospel of Matthew, a Jew no doubt very familiar with the book of Isaiah, discovered in this passage from Isaiah, the coming of our Savior, Jesus the Christ. During Advent and Christmas, we lifted up the words of Isaiah as foretelling and proof of the identity of the blessed babe. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus himself picks a particular passage from Isaiah to read in the temple, and we read it this morning earlier in worship. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because God has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. God has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord's favor. The acceptable year of the Lord's favor. Yes, this passage calls for procedural justice, but not just so that things will calm down and get back to where we don't think we have to worry about it anymore. Here, Jesus quotes Isaiah about changing the world, of changing our relationship with God and all that God has given, creating a new world, a new justice for all. This is distributive justice. However, Bible scholar Paul Hansen finds in this prophecy the nature of response demanded of an enslaved Israel and from all of us. Look, people of God, look what you've been through. God has never left you, and in spite of everything you have endured. In your worst nightmare, somehow, God has always been with you. Now you are called to step away from the way that you lived before you were banished to Babylon 500 years before Christ, and in the United States 21 centuries after Christ, cheating each other, treating each other so badly, being selfish, judgmental and unkind, hating the Samaritans, or you name the people in our own time who are your own flesh and blood. Step away from all of that and do justice. Do laws that embrace those who are broken and hurting, and not just putting a Band-Aid on something so that we can look away, but also living, dying to world-changing life. Changing by doing distributed justice. Immigrants and refugees all around the world, and immigrants and refugees, Americans right outside of these doors, are suffering and dying. Doris said to us in her message this morning, there are people living on the streets who are cold, so very cold. Isaiah calls us, Jesus calls us, to be in a constant state and mode of distributive justice. What can we share? What can we put aside to give away? Jesus was our everlasting, blessed example. So now, what does the Savior look like? Us. Let's pray. So God, if in your arms you carry us all day long, do you not call us to carry our sisters and brothers? Do you not call us to change our way of living, existing, saving, being prudent, so that there's something to give to others? Do you not call us to no longer be judgmental of those who are not doing as well as we are, and instead lend a hand to help them out? Help us to be justice doers. Help us to move forward in your name. We thank you for all good gifts.